again, Mr. Independent Lou Dobbs.
The Obama administration remains divided on creating a strategy on Afghanistan and deciding whether to send in more troops, as the commanders in the field have requested. But after 8 years of war and little progress to show for it, many in this country are saying it is time to bring our troops home, not just from Afghanistan, but perhaps the rest of the world as well. That is the subject of our face-off debate tonight. Hillary Mann Leverett is the CEO of Stratega, Director for Iran, Afghanistan, and Persian Gulf Affairs at the National Security Council in the Bush administration. Good to have you with us. And Herb London, he is the president of the Hudson Institute, and it's great to have you with us.
Pleasure, dude.
Let's start with, first, some reports that this process that the president has embarked upon may take another month or so. He is being obviously deliberate to craft a strategy. He is saying that he wants a strategy before he decides on resources. Is that not a reasonable approach?
Well, it would be, but unfortunately we heard that story before, just 6 or 7 months ago in March, when he came out in front of the Bank of Flags with his Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense and said we had the perfect strategy. But then when he was given the bill for what the resources would take to resource the strategy, he balked. And unfortunately, I think the strategy is collapsing right before our eyes.
Collapsing, and the outcome likely to be what, Hillary?
I think you could end up with a reprieve, with a redo of Somalia in the first Clinton years, the first 2 years of the Clinton administration, where they inherited a conflict from the first Bush administration in Somalia. They didn't know what to do. They didn't want to look weak. They didn't want to withdraw right away. It was complete confusion, and we ended up with a real disaster there.
Do you concur with that outlook, Herb?
No, I don't. I mean, frankly, a withdrawal, I think, would have catastrophic consequences, not merely in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan, a nation that possesses nuclear weapons. You've got a porous border. You've got what is equivalent to the Wild West and Waziristan. It seems to me that what you need is a strategy for victory. The strategy for victory is creating some form of stability. And that, I think, could be achieved if, in fact, the McChrystal strategy is put in place. The president tasked him with a strategy, and he came up with a strategy. Unfortunately, the president is suffering from a Hamlet-like pose.
Well, let me ask you this, Hillary. Herb says that we need to remain there. Withdrawing our troops would be catastrophic to U.S. interest. What interest would be lost if we were to withdraw our troops from Afghanistan and instead rely upon other powers in the region who are, after all, responsible, not at least in a hegemonic sense, but at least in terms of proximity to Afghanistan itself?
Well, we certainly need to have a regional strategy, an aggressive regional strategy that deals effectively with Pakistan, India, Iran, Russia, and China, the key players in the region. And then we need a really effective domestic strategy inside Afghanistan that deals forthrightly with the Taliban and its political role in the country.
And what level of troops would be required to carry such a strategy out?
I'm not sure.
Approach. I shouldn't call that a strategy.
Right. No, it is an approach. It isn't a strategy. I agree. It's an approach. I'm not sure, but I don't think it would take 100,000 plus troops. I think I would also agree you shouldn't have a precipitous withdrawal, but you can have a timed, phased withdrawal that is consistent with an aggressive domestic strategy inside the country, linked to concessions from the Taliban, and in place with an aggressive regional strategy.
I suspect that you both read the Times Online piece in which they report a terrific piece of reporting on the lack of, well, the demoralization of many of our troops in Afghanistan, coming primarily through the ears of chaplains who work with those soldiers who are on the front lines. Sergeant Christopher Hughes from Detroit, if we could put this up, he was asked if the mission was worthwhile, and he replied, "If I knew exactly what the mission was, probably so, but I don't." The other comments from the soldiers, as related by those chaplains, I mean, they're heartrending. 8 years yesterday of war in Afghanistan, and we have our commander-in-chief now conferring with the bipartisan leadership of Congress, his top military leaders, talking about strategy. We've lost almost 800 men in Afghanistan, 4,500 wounded, and we have the temerity to call this a general staff?
Well, I think you've raised a very important issue, and I'm quite sympathetic to those soldiers who put their lives on the line and not entirely clear about what the mission is. But keep in mind that we did learn an awful lot in Iraq. We have a counterinsurgency strategy. Some in the military might call it an ink spot strategy. where we protect the major population centers and keep the good guys away from the bad guys. We've learned a good deal about counterinsurgency. We haven't applied any of those rules.
If I may, Herb.
Well, you're correct.
8 years
You're correct.
of training wheels is an embarrassment for the superpower, the single superpower in this world, the most advanced military technology, the most advanced military on the planet, has been held in check for 8 years. And one could argue, Hillary, I think, that in part because we have generals who think it is somehow clever to fight the enemy's war rather than create our own conditions and parameters for that war, which, by the way, is taught in every war college in the country as a first condition of victory.
Well, keep in mind, I'm sorry, but keep in mind that we've been in Iraq for 7 years as well. We've learned a good deal. We have stabilization in Iraq that would not have been anticipated 3 years ago. We've learned a good deal about counterinsurgency. Petraeus did put a strategy in place that made a difference. It seems to me that McChrystal has attempted to introduce a strategy very similar to what Petraeus had in mind.
But what we're also forgetting, though, is we have another precedent. We have 1991, after we routed Iraq from Kuwait, and we didn't know what the mission was going to be, leaving Saddam Hussein in Kuwait. We kept our troops with no end in sight in Saudi Arabia for more than 8 years. And do you know who didn't like that? Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda came after us in part because they thought we were occupying Saudi Arabia. We risk the same thing if they perceive us to be occupying Afghanistan with no end in sight, no exit strategy. We need to leverage that now, get the Taliban into the political process, use it against Al-Qaeda, and do smart politics on the ground, not think that we can just keep troops there with no end in sight and have no repercussions.
It is not consistent in any way with at least my reading of history for the United States to have 200,000 troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, to have deployed another 150 to 200,000 troops around 63 countries in the world. We have approximately 40,000 troops in South Korea. Every military leader with whom I've spoken says those troops would be dead within moments should the North Koreans decide to invade South Korea. Why is it not a matter of some discussion for the public to understand that we have garrison troops, station them on the DNZ in an absolutely vulnerable military position in which they are nothing, and we have to be straightforward about this, in the minds of many generals, nothing more than cannon fodder and represent no geopolitical advantage to the United States. Why do we persist? Is it not time to begin to reconsider what we are doing with our troops?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the reconsideration of the deployment of forces, I'm very much in favor of it.
Yes.
I think you're quite right when you talk about Korea. The forces there are nothing but a tripwire. I think you stated it correctly. I'm not sure that it's appropriate to have American forces there. But when you're talking about Afghanistan, I think you're talking about a very different situation. And I do believe that the additional forces, applying some sort of ink spot theory, where in fact you can separate the populations from those who are attacking, separate the good guys from the bad guys, could make a difference in the end.
You know, go into a restaurant in Seoul, South Korea. Some restaurants will have a sign in the front that says, "No dogs and no Americans." We don't do this without cost to our credibility and to our power around the world.
Why is it that the United States is refusing to use its advantages in technological superiority militarily rather than acquiesce to the potential enemy and create strategies and deployments based on the enemy's parameters rather than our own?
Well, look, I mean, we are deploying the Predator, which has been a very effective weapon, but you can employ it. It does not have the same effect as boots on the ground.
No,
There's nothing that can replace that.
I'm going to have to wrap this here. I thank you very much for beginning this conversation. Obviously, that's what we have done. I hope you'll both come back soon. I'd like to continue this every week. I certainly hope you'll be amongst those who will be joining us and rejoining us over the weeks ahead, because it's a very important issue, not just for a president and our national leaders and military. As they say, war is too important to be left to the generals. Thank you very much, Hillary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead, all the president's czars, just what do they do?